Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here with us. My name is Kayla. I'm the administrator and social reforms lead for the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And in collaboration with London Arts and Health, we are interviewing the incredible SK Marley in celebration of Pride. So I'm just going to pass over to Drashti to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Drashti, and I work as the Projects and Communications Officer at London Arts and Health. I'm also an arts based therapy practitioner, so that makes me really interested in the different themes we look at through creativity for social change and for well being. So, very excited to be here and to hear more from you, SK.
Thank you, Drashti. Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm SK. I'm a comms guy in the charity sector and try to do some creative and research and writing work with a bit of facilitation when I'm not doing that. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's our absolute pleasure, honestly. So we just wanted to kick off with the first question. So would you be able to share more about your work and how your journey into studying British trans prehistory has evolved?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, in my creative work, I've long been interested in how people in prehistoric Britain were living in non-dual ways. And I'll explain a bit what I mean by non-dual. Duality is the concept of there being two things, and it's sort of a worldview that we currently prescribe to in the West. It suggests that everything is made up of binary opposites. You're either that or you're that, male, female, animal, human, land, water, transgender, cisgender. And a big part of that is this self-other binary as well. Whereas non-duality, the thing I'm interested in from prehistoric Britain, is what I think a much more open and welcoming worldview. It's an ancient aspect of Buddhism, and various forms of it are embodied by social values of different indigenous communities across the world today. Non-duality basically allows spectrums to exist, boundaries that can blur and merge, and most importantly, it means that being one thing doesn't put you in opposition to another thing. And to me, that's like an answer to a lot of our global issues today, including social discrimination in all forms, and a lot of the climate crisis problems as well that we're seeing today. So I think it's a really promising space to look into today. So that's why I'm interested in that area. As to how I got into prehistoric trans history stuff in Britain, I mean, it's quite a higgledy-piggledy answer, so bear with me. I very much followed the Gandalf the Grey's advice of follow your nose, so that's how I've ended up here. But yeah, it's a long time ago now. I did a English literature and creative writing BA, and I was exposed to some Japanese literature on the sly during that, and I really fell in love with it. It was sort of a very subtle and quietly heartbreaking type of literature. I'd never really found anything like that before in English literature. And the natural world is so ingrained in a lot of its metaphors and experiences. So it was really different and refreshing. And so after my degree, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I moved to Japan for a couple of years and taught English there. And when I wasn't doing that, I was sort of looking at my own little research project on Japanese pre-modern poetry and how prehistoric poets were used, pre-modern poets, very different, pre-modern poets in Japan were sort of using place names from across this entire Japanese archipelago in poetry that was used as a way to kind of create this idea of state. It's when Japan was still becoming a state. And at that point, Japan was like based in Kyoto in the south, and the whole northeast of Japan, which is today Tohoku, that was actually peopled by the indigenous Ainu peoples and not part of the state at all. And this poetry was sort of being used by the state to create this idea that Japan at once owned the northeast, but also was othering it. So it was using this sort of barbaric wilderness and these uncivilized peoples to create an idea of self by presenting them as the other. And so when I was walking on this poetry trip, I sort of went on a lot of little trips to visit these places that these poems had been written at different periods of history, some of which bought into that statehood idea and some that challenged it. And I really learned through that how like landscape and place and people get impacted by state narratives. One is like this idea, but it impacts real places and real people. So when I got back to the UK, I tried to turn that into a master's proposition, sort of looking at poetry as a tool for state formation, and how it was used to colonize the Northeast. And through that was my first introduction to archaeology and human geography. So yeah, I was back in Britain, and I was sort of seeing this country through fresh eyes, I guess, because I've been away and I'd been living in a different culture for a long time. And suddenly I was interested in all the things that I had kind of ignored before, you know, British folklore, mythology, but also landscape and connections with identity across British history. And I started to write a novel for young readers based on those themes called Albion Awakes. And I based all of that in Yorkshire because I had grown up in the southeast, but my grandparents had a caravan in Yorkshire where they lived, and we used to come up a lot as kids. It was my first experience of wilderness and really grabbed me. So the moors have always been this big romantic place in my head. So I set the novel there and I started to research the area. And that's where I came across these amazing Star Car replica headdresses. They're from a site called Star Car, and they are headdresses made from deer skulls, and they're 11,000 years old. And I got so excited by these, but I didn't know why yet. So I kept digging and digging and digging, and I got really into prehistory. There seemed to be something really exciting there. And at this point, I was still a straight woman. And as I was writing this novel and looking at these headdresses, I was sort of leaning more and more into this non-dual space, but without knowing that's what I was doing. And I was excavating my own gender identity at the same time. My protagonist became non-binary before I was. And then I obviously realized that was a hint for me. But yeah, these Star Car headdresses, I've got a replica here.
Oh, yes, please.
Like to see it. Yeah, so they're made from like deer skulls, and we think people wore them like this and attached it to their heads with a leather thong through these holes there. And so you can see they worked the antler quite a lot, right? They've sort of halved these antlers and shorn them down so easier to wear on the head. And basically we think people who were maybe spiritual leaders of their communities were wearing these. There's a lot of evidence in prehistory to show that objects from animals maintained a power from that animal. So if someone's wearing a headdress from a deer, they get embodied a bit with the power of that deer. And so there's more power in being more than human. There's less of a binary between people and animals. And I found that really fascinating. And that was spiritually significant to not just be human. Suddenly we're not in a hierarchy anymore between human and animals. And I thought that was so exciting. So yeah, that's how that started. And helped me come out to myself. So all really helpful stuff, you know.
Wow. That is incredible. Like
Piggledy.
just higgledy-piggledy, but so interesting as well. And as you were talking out and you were talking about your time in Japan and so forth, it kind of helped me to piece together some of the elements of the Transcape project that you are putting together. Like I really kind of honed in on that whole idea of pilgrimage when you said you were doing the going on the poetry walks and stuff about sport. That's incredibly interesting how it's kind of rooted its way through from the origins of studies and so forth.
Yeah, on the surface they don't look that connected, do they? Japanese studies and prehistory, but there's something there.
Amazing.
Thank you.
So second question. So can you tell us about your project, Our Transcapes, and how the intersection of creative health, spirituality, nature, and science kind of all came together to lay the foundations of the work?
Yeah, sure. So our Transcapes is a social impact project aiming to benefit the well-being of primarily trans people in the UK, particularly young trans people. And it's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council as part of a wider research project called Queer Natures, led by Dr. Ina Linger at the University of Exeter. And our Transcapes is my contribution to her project as an artist in residence. And so the project, we're trying to understand whether prehistoric, non-dual ways of living, creative writing, and becoming part of a community out in nature can be therapeutically beneficial for trans folks. The outline of the project, it's basically a tour or a pilgrimage through landscapes that are similar to prehistoric ones, as close as I could find them, you know. And along the way, we talk about artifacts such as the headdresses that express non-dual attitudes from prehistory. And then we finish off with a creative writing based workshop in an indoor space as a group, and using aspects of narrative psychotherapy, mindfulness, things like that, and using these artifacts almost as characters and learning a bit from them in a way that I hope will positively impact our own internal relationships with our gender identities. Right now, it's targeted at the trans community, as I say, but I would really love it in the future to expand it to anyone who's interested, because I think living in non-dual ways is beneficial to all of us, just freeing ourselves from limiting categories, you know. Yeah, I suppose in respect to the creative health aspect, I'm interested in seeing how creative writing can be therapeutically beneficial. Barring the work of Professor Paul Crawford at the University of Nottingham, there's actually not much research in the creative health area around creative writing specifically. So I'm hoping this project can give a little insight into that as well. And basically, with creative health and creative writing, there are kind of two forms of writing that people talk about the most, and they're both parts of narrative psychotherapy practices. Narrative psychotherapy is the aim to help people heal from whatever sort of internal narrative they might be carrying that are harmful to them. One of these forms of narrative psychotherapy is expressive writing, a bit like journaling, where you're sort of getting your thoughts and feelings out of yourself and onto the page, and that can be really therapeutic. The other is creative writing, which kind of goes another step further. It's sort of where we transform our thoughts and feelings into something else, into art. And this second form of writing requires a bit more objective dealing with our own personal thoughts and experiences and feelings. We must create characters and stories that aren't just copies of ourselves all the time, right? So we need to have a bit of space between ourselves and what we're creating. And I think that helps, or at least I hope, that will help people step out of their internal narratives and social narratives of transness and get to play in a space where more positive healing narratives of non-duality being celebrated spiritually in our history, in this land where we are right now, so that some of those potential internal narratives that trans people are carrying around with them can be challenged in a gentle and fun way, I'm hoping. So that's really that part. And yeah, I'll just touch on the old science, spirituality and nature aspect, which is shorter. So basically in prehistory, all of those three things are the same thing. There aren't these needless kind of distinctions between those three things. In the archaeological record, it's incredibly hard to distinguish between what was science, what was nature, what was spirituality in prehistoric Britain, especially in early prehistoric Britain. And so there was this lack of division between how we saw ourselves as people and how we saw all other beings. Like the bones of our ancestors are like jumbled together beneath stones in passage tombs and things like that. Individualism ceases to be If
Mhm.
collectively we're put together, we're more powerful for the living. Dogs are buried with the same respect in grave goods as people. Wetland landscapes, caves, and mines are gateways to other worlds where that boundary between this world and spiritual worlds is thin. And
Mhm.
wooden dolls in the shape of people were built purposefully with removable genitalia. So gender fluidity enabled them to reach spiritual worlds faster and support the community that made them. And I've got one of those here as well. This is my favorite thing that I've ever. This is a
Oh.
Ruse car figurine. It's from Yorkshire. We found 7 of these bad boys in an old marsh in East Yorkshire near Hull when a farmer dug them up in the Victorian period. They're all these sorts of identical warriors, and they were standing in these massive serpent-headed ships voyaging to the other world, we think. So we're deposited to the bog on purpose so that they could help their community in whatever way by traveling to the spirit world for them. And they all have removable phalluses. So they're not male, but they're
Mhm.
also not female, because at this time, lots of god dollies, they're called god dollies, wooden figurines for spiritual purposes. Lots of them across Europe have been found, and all of the female ones have a very clear V shape to represent the vulva, whereas these guys don't have that. So they're not female and they're not male. They're
Mm.
fluid, they can change sex. And because they're an in-between sort of thing, like they're non-dual, just like bogs are water and land at the same time,
Mhm.
they kind of both are powerful to help people travel between worlds, we think, right? So they're really powerful as well. So there's all these non-dual things floating around in prehistory, and all of them connected to spiritual practice and belief, which does suggest that there is a certain wisdom or knowledge that's more accessible through non-duality than there is in duality. And I think that's really cool. Yeah, so science, spirituality, and nature, they're all together in this theme of prehistory. And these are some of these, attitudes of non-duality, especially between human and non-human beings, are still, values that some indigenous communities have in the world today. And the West is suddenly starting to panic and turn towards these communities for their wisdom on how to defeat the climate crisis. So there are these like ties between non-duality and a healthier world, I think. Yeah, and I think it helps us look at the interconnectedness between all things, basically,
Mm.
and that can really help us remember that we're all just animals. Like, however we identify, we all belong in this world, however we look, wherever we're from, and we don't have to be in opposition to other people.
Mhm. Incredible. There's so much to unpack in what you
Oh,
just
I
said.
know.
I'm just trying to process it all. Like there was here
Yeah, I
and
know it took me too long
there.
to slim this answer down, but I so many tangents to possibly go down. But yeah,
No,
that's
but when you were talking, it's just things that I never thought about. Like when you were talking about the actual form of the body, but then you were talking about the water and the bog, and
mm,
just taking all of these things into consideration to explore that interconnectedness between all of us that I also
mm,
that we have, and not and stripping that away to not create a boundary but actually bring us together, which I think
yeah,
is a really beautiful sentiment at the end of the day. And I also
definitely.
really like what you said earlier about the power, how you were using storytelling to kind of create that space for fun and to play. I thought that
Yeah.
was really key,
Mm,
because I feel like most learning is achieved through play, like, and creating that space for the trans community must be incredibly impactful, just to be and just to play and explore what's going on inside them and have an
mm.
outlet for that's connected in our environment and everything that we are. It's must be very freeing, you know.
Yeah, I hope so, man. I mean, there's a lot of research to show that trans people don't feel as safe in communal spaces as much
Hmm.
as some other people, especially younger people, and a lack of community. There's a lot of isolation and loneliness. So I'm kind of hoping that by taking people outside into nature together with only trans people in that group, they're going to hopefully make some connections that feel good with the nature as well as each other, and, you know, just be in a space that they don't have to worry about being judged or being perceived in certain ways. And, you know, just make this basic connection that we belong in nature, we are nature, just like everybody else.
Just like everybody else. Yeah, incredible. I think you've answered the next question pretty much, but I'll say it again.
A little bit. I've got more. Oh.
So, in light of the recent Supreme Court ruling over the Equality Act and anti-trans sentiments being disseminated across social narratives, how do you feel that our transcapes will impact the lives of young trans people in the UK?
Yeah, so after the Supreme Court ruling in April, this does feel a bit more urgent and needed than before. When I first started to create this project, I was looking at anti-trans hate crime in the UK, and since 2012, which is when mainstream media really started to up its game in associating transgender people with violence and grooming and all of these things. Between then and 2023, there was a 400% increase in anti-trans hate crime in the UK. And that's before April's ruling. So I imagine that's just going to get a lot worse. And for people to feel justified now in expressing transphobic views, gender critical people are being given more of a voice. Yeah, basically there's calls for segregation, which is pretty mad, actually. So I'm very much hoping that our transcapes can offer an alternative narrative for trans people to that one, and it's actually based in historical evidence as well. Like, there are these real things and these real beliefs that have been embedded in our landscapes for over 10,000 years, and now we've decided that's just not how we want to control people or society anymore, so we've changed it, and suddenly we're all supposed to fit into these very limiting boxes. And I think that's why it's also really important for the content of our transcapes to reach cisgender people as well, because ultimately that can change a lot of the social sphere, but it just seems to be more needed in the trans space at the moment. But yes.
Okay. And do you think you'll open up the project, because the project currently focuses on young trans people? You understand? Do you think you'll open that up later on as the project develops?
Yeah, absolutely. So from being in online spaces, it's really clear that younger trans people are internalizing a lot of this anti-trans stuff. There's a lot of my life won't begin until I pass, or I can't be trans unless I'm moving from one binary transgender to another binary gender. And they won't be taken seriously, and they won't have political rights unless those things happen. Now, that is kind of true. And even now, with that, even if they move completely from one binary gender to another, those rights aren't really there anymore either. But people are internalizing that stuff. And I feel like for my generation, I'm in my 30s, although we didn't have the language for transness and non-binary and stuff like that, we definitely also didn't have the scrutiny and the discrimination. So I feel like now younger people have that language, and they may have a framework by which they can faster understand themselves and unravel a lot of those uncomfortable feelings. But at the same time, they probably feel a lot more less able to do that. And when you're a young person, you know, you are under the thumb of power of different people, you know, whether that's your parents, your school, your doctor, you have so much less freedom. So I feel like right now, they're the people probably most in need of this stuff. But the transgender community in general, absolutely, especially since April's ruling. And yeah, then hopefully anyone who fancies it would be lovely to invite all people along, because I think we can all benefit from it, as I said before.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you think prehistoric non-dual attitudes might offer us as human beings today in the face of climate crisis?
Sure. Yeah, so in the same way that prehistoric non-dual attitudes can help challenge this sort of self-other binary between different groups of people. I think it can also do the same for the binary between nature and culture, like as if people are separate from the natural world. The star car headdresses are a great example of that, you know, where they empower the wearer with the power of a deer, you know, that they're being more powerful because they're interacting with animals that are not human and things like that. There's not a hierarchy between beings. Yeah, I think it's not a new idea at all. It's an ancient idea. It's older than our idea of that binary, really, but just that we're not separate from nature. We're built from it, molecule by molecule. We don't own it. And as we can see with droughts, wildfires, and floodings, I mean, we can't control it as much as we think we can. And so we need to acknowledge its agency, you know, and respect it and rediscover our kinship with it. And I think that's something a lot of people are doing anyway in the world today. But our prehistoric ancestors were doing it as just the way that they saw everything in life, you know. I think it can help us feel held and in community and less existentially threatened if we are in kinship with our world. And I think it's a sad thing, but I think it's possibly true that white Western European people might take that a little more seriously if they think that also happened here and it's not happening from people they don't relate to. You know, I think that colonial idea of self-othering, you know, wilderness and uncivilized people and barbarism and primitiveness, that stuff is so present still. This idea that, you know, people living in different ways to ours are lesser than or less complex or, you know, less progressive, less developed. So it's a horrible idea, but I really think, you know, saying that it's not just over there, guys. You know, this stuff is real here too. Sadly, might have weight. Yeah, it's a sad truth. But that's why I'm focusing on Britain, because for so long, I think trans people have had to look elsewhere to try to validate their beingness. You know, like, oh, well, there's two-spirit people in Native American culture, so I must be real. There's something a little icky about that too, really. There's something potentially a little colonial about that too. So it's like, well, actually, do we even need to do that, guys? Like, there is stuff here, you know? And yeah. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but
no, we love a tangent.
Oh, good.
No, yeah, I really resonate with everything that you said. Like, environments are so key to cultivating safety for everyone, and I feel like those links to nature have been severed so deeply and amongst our communities, and it's about the access, right? Because a lot of people feel like it's not for them. They don't understand how it serves them. There's no connection to the history of how we utilize the land, how we lived off of the land, how it was just normal everyday life rather than this extra thing to do and access for our well-being, you know.
Right.
And it's attitudes around that to bring it back to being like a fundamental part of who we are and accessing that within ourselves. So I completely agree.
Yeah, and that's why we're sort of I'm working with this lovely group here, Peak Queer Adventures in Yorkshire.
About them after I visited your website.
Oh yeah, they're great. So they're all about raising visibility of trans and queer people in the outdoors. Precisely that, you know, like there is an access issue anyway, and then you add on top the way people might not feel safe to go and do that on their own while being visibly queer. So yeah, exactly that. And I think especially after the COVID-19, yeah, we learned how important that connection with nature is. And doctors started to prescribe people with hikes, and ecotherapy became a school of thought. And that feels so odd when you think that people lived and worked, and every part of their life involved the natural world.
Yeah.
And where are we now that we've got to a point where we have to proactively decide to go outside, feel not depressed enough to do that for ourselves as a form of self-care? That is crazy, right?
It is.
Yeah, it's just really sad that we've got to that point, I think. Yeah.
But it's just, how much do we have to strip back to get back to that? Because like you were talking about COVID, and it did become apparent how important that was, but then life returns to normal, right? And that becomes a strain to kind of continue that. And it's not even just a physical strain, it's mental, it's the headspace, it's the capacity to go out and do that and not have it feel like an extra thing, but something that's embedded within our lifestyle. And yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
It's just sad, really, isn't it? I mean, yeah, we learned so much from COVID-19, and then it's all just kind of gone. I think we all imagined that the way we did things was going to change after that. It hasn't really.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, SK, for
thank you
being with us today. There's so much from this I have to process. I'm gonna have to watch it back. Because just from where you started, from your journey in Japan, and just how everything has come together to lead you here, it really is incredible. And your project, Our Transcapes, is wonderful. Like I said before, when I first read about it, I was like, I have to know more. So please let people know how they can find out more about it. Would it be by visiting your website and how to sign up and so forth?
Yeah, sure. So my website is just my name, so SK Marley, all one word, .co.uk, and you can read more about the project and my other work there. At the moment, as this project is part of Queer Natures, we're running a very specific research-based version of Our Transcapes with a limited sort of selected group of people. Working with Peak Queer Adventures. But after that, it'll be widened out, I really hope. And I'm also planning in the long term to be making lots of resources readily available and free on my website that people can take into classrooms, social groups, community groups, whatever they want to do, really, because it's so strange how so much of this history is completely absent from our historical narratives in Britain. And it's sad because I felt so free and joyful when I found out about these things. It felt suddenly like, oh my God, no one can tell me I don't belong here anymore. Like my landscape, literally where I'm standing, this has been a place that we would now say has been queer, so it's really exciting. And I just think everybody should have access to that. Queer archaeology is still a relatively new field, even in archaeology and academia. And it's only been around for about 25 years since people started to introduce queer theory and queer studies into archaeology. And it's really still quite inaccessible if you're not in that field. It's behind paywalls on the internet or in academic language that not everyone can access. So I am also going to start writing a book, a non-fiction, accessible book called Our Transcapes, after this project is really in flow, and using the learnings that we gain from the project as well about, what's the most useful stuff to put in that book. But it's going to be just joyful and queer and gay and also historically accurate. So that's nice. So those are all the ways I'm going to try and get it out there. But until then, you can just pop on my website or my Instagram handle, which is a bit long, so I might just SK and then like 4 underscores and then Marley. So many SK Marleys out there, who knew? But yeah, that's